Hello everyone, welcome to Mr. Noctory. Tonight, we're heading to Delphi, a place where the answers are vague, but the smell of sulfur is very real. You're not a scholar, that's right. Tonight, you're temporarily reincarnated as an ancient oracle, or as the Greeks called her, the Pythia. Your job begins when no one else knows who to ask, when a king wants to go to war but doesn't dare yet, when a mother-in-law wants to know if her daughter-in-law is cheating, when a farmer worries that if he sows today, will the rain come in time. All of them, from politicians to grape vendors, come to you. They climb the slope, they fast, they bring goats, chickens, gold, milk, tears and hope. Then they kneel and send their questions toward you, who are currently dizzy from lack of oxygen. Tonight, if you actually find this a nice place to rest, hit like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely want to. No pressure. Just like the rule in an old tavern, you only stay if you need a place to be quiet. And you know what I love most? Reading the comments and seeing where you're from and what time it is. Whether it's New York or Norway, 1 a.m. or 5 a.m., you're here, and I see you. Now dim the lights, turn on a little fan if you have one. Not because it's hot, but for that soft, gentle hum. You're standing in front of Apollo's temple, on Mount Parnassus. No car horns, no Wi-Fi, only stone, wind, and the kind of cold that cuts into your neck like a displeased god. The road here isn't paved. It's woven from sweat, mud, and the footprints of thousands of desperate pilgrims before you. Each step up this mountain is a gamble. Some prayed for victory, some for a son. Some just prayed for the god to help their wife stop nagging about sun-drying grapes on the roof. And on this mountaintop, you understand why they come, not just for Apollo, but because Parnassus was once believed to be the center of the universe. According to legend, Zeus released 2 eagles from the ends of the world, and they met right here. That spot is marked by a sacred stone called the Omphalos, the navel of the world. You can touch it. It's cold as ice, but strangely, your heart feels warm. You're different. You didn't come here to ask. You stayed to become the one who is asked. But to be asked, you must be chosen. No one becomes a Pythia just because she hikes well or talks vaguely. You must be a woman over 50, live a pure life, no scandals, yet you must dress like a maiden. Yes, a bizarre rule, introduced after a few oracles were kidnapped by pilgrims in too much grief. From then on, Pythias had to look trustworthy, but not too inviting. You didn't choose this job, it chose you. And when you said yes, you agreed to spend the rest of your life in a stone room, surrounded by smoke, silence, and questions from a world you no longer belong to. The Temple of Delphi isn't some grand palace. It's small, cold, and smells more like damp stone than any basement in Brooklyn. The roof is low, the stone columns chipped, the walls painted white with limestone powder mixed with villagers' tears. You don't sit in the main hall. You're led deeper to where the earth itself cracks open. Not metaphorically, literally. A small fissure in the stone floor, releasing a scent of something not meant for humans. Smoke rises from beneath the earth. Not Hollywood-style clouds, just thin wisps curling around your legs, like a strange cat brushing against you and walking off. No one knows exactly what that gas is. Some say it's divine vapor. Some say it's methane. You just know, inhale enough, and You hear Apollo's voice crackling like a detuned radio. In the middle of that stone room is a three-legged stool. No backrest, no cushion, cold enough to chill fish on. That stool is no accident. It symbolizes the three sacred principles Apollo represents: truth, wisdom, and the power of foresight. Sitting on it means you accept becoming a vessel, not the star. You don't get to speak your mind. You don't even get to cough too loudly. Every breath you take now is a signal from the gods, or at least what people want to believe is one. You sit down, legs trembling, hands shaking, not sure if it's from the cold, the fumes, or the feeling of becoming the bridge between humanity and someone you've never seen. The air in the room is thick. The faint oil lamp flickers, casting writhing shapes on the stone ceiling, like sacred serpents slithering above. The scent from burning resin mixed with natural gases makes you feel like you're inhaling the earth's memory. And sometimes, from somewhere in the dark, a tiny drip, tap, tap, sounds like the heartbeat of an ancient world. A world only those with nowhere left to go can hear. Out there the world goes on. Athens still fights. Corinth still argues. Sparta still hits the gym naked. And you sit here, on a slab of stone, by a crack in the earth, with a strange mission: to speak what you yourself don't understand, and convince the world it's the voice of the gods. This is not a place for the certain, not for those needing clear answers. This is for you, the one who's learned to live in the fog and turn ambiguity into belief. If you're still awake, take another breath. We still have many prophecies to make in a world that doesn't need truth, only something sacred. No glass windows, no swivel chairs, whiteboards, or coffee machines. Your workspace is a cave, small, damp, dark, and it breathes. Not the kind of, oh, the air here is so fresh, but actually breathes. Delphi is more than 700 meters above sea level. The wind from Mount Parnassus always feels like someone rubbing ice on the back of your neck. There are mornings when you have to tap your forehead to check if it can still hear anything, because your whole head feels frozen. Winters here are long, gloomy, and damp enough to grow mushrooms with your breath. Of course, no one cares how cold the Pythia gets, as long as the god still picks up. You can feel it, a warm draft rising from the earth in a rhythm like the chest of a giant creature sleeping deeply beneath your feet. Every morning, if you can call it morning, since no sunlight ever makes it through the thick stone, you step into your workspace like stepping into the belly of an ancient dragon. Every time you exhale, the room exhales back. The ceiling is so low you have to duck your head. The walls jagged like the skin of a stone beast, and the floor slippery like the soles of Hermes' feet after a marathon across the Mediterranean. In the center, always the three-legged stool. It never moves, though no one remembers how it was fastened there. Maybe with belief, maybe just with fear, that if anyone dares lift it from the rock crack, Apollo will sneeze and blow the whole temple away. You sit down like every day. Posture, straight back, head up, eyes looking nowhere. Because here, seeing doesn't help much. You don't need to look, you need to listen. Not with your ears, but with your body. You listen through your skin, through your heart, through fingers numb from the cold but sharper than any antenna. And then the smoke begins to rise. No alarm sounds. No voice saying, Apollo is online, just the scent starts to change. From damp stone to a whiff of smoke, then to something like someone roasting orange peels on a charcoal stove and forgetting to take them off. You know, that's when the voice begins. And of course, people always have something to ask. One day, it's a general with a map and 2 roasted chickens asking, "Should we attack Thebes?" The next day, it's a rich lady from Corfu asking, "Is my husband cheating? And if so, with whom?" One time, a poet came just to ask, "Should I rename my work Blood-Soaked Spring?" You don't know why the god picked you to be the answering machine for all of ancient Greece, but it's too late now. You sit there like an old radio, transmitting the anxieties of every land, pretending you still have control over the signal. It's not an actual voice, no booming male voice from the void, just words starting to grow in your mind like fresh grass cracking through stone. When you first started, you panicked. Not because the god was too powerful, but because sometimes you really fainted. There was a time you sat down and felt dizzy right away. The smoke wasn't from the god, but from inside your own head. People said you were channeling too much divine force. The truth was you hadn't eaten breakfast, and the air in the cave was so thick even a fly would have to swim through to survive. Those kinds of accidents aren't rare. Some Pythias have lost their voices for 3 months after one prophecy too long. So you learned a lesson. Keep prophecy short, breathe steadily, don't mess with gas from the underworld. Because those words aren't yours. They come from somewhere else, slowly, strangely, and extremely vague. For example, one windy morning, 3 words appeared in your head: horse, autumn, not returning. So you told the general of Argos, the rider will go toward the withering gold, but autumn is not a season of return. He cried, said, "Thank you, Pythia. Now I understand my fate." Then went to fight Sparta, and really died. But you're not responsible. You didn't tell him to fight. You just passed the message. You're the god's radio, not the editor. Day after day, you learn to speak without speaking, to answer without answering. To deliver like language is a melody, and whoever understands it hears themselves. Your workspace doesn't need much room. Just enough for one woman, one 3-legged stool, and the secrets no one else dares to hold on to. If anyone asks, "What does it feel like working here every day?" you'd say, "Like living inside a dream, where you never know if you're awake or asleep, and all you can do is breathe with it. The rock crack still breathes, you're still here, and the dream isn't over yet. You wake up before the sky does, not because of an alarm clock. Ancient Greece didn't have those. But because of a vague sound inside your head, like the footsteps of yourself, from another dream. Outside, mist wraps thick around the foot of Mount Parnassus, making the world seem like it's holding back an unspoken sentence. You throw on a thin woolen cloak, which hasn't been warm enough since last month, then step out of your room, heading toward the sacred spring of Castalia. This cloak has followed you since your first day at the temple, and no one dares to wash it, not out of laziness, but because it's a prophet's cloak, soaked in sacred smoke, divine voices, and even the scent of temple stone. Once, a new handmaiden, feeling sorry for your shivering, dipped it in scented herbal water. The next morning, the temple was in uproar. They said Apollo was angry because the smell of lavender had overpowered the sacred air, The handmaiden was banished to a vegetable farm, and you had to wear that flowery wet cloak for 3 weeks to atone to the god. They believe Apollo once stopped here to wash his hands before delivering prophecy. The water here isn't just to clean the body, but to cleanse the mind, as if you're peeling away layers of human thought. Every time you bow down, the cold water cuts through your flesh, but you don't retreat, because this is ritual. It's how you're allowed to forget yourself for a few hours. No one reminds you, but you know the process. Before you can hear the god, you must wash away every human noise. Bathe yourself in spring water cold as a blade. You shiver violently. Your teeth clack like 2 bronze bowls playing meditation rhythms. But you don't complain, because this is the ritual. This is the vow. This is how you pay rent to Apollo. Next comes the laurel leaf. No one's sure it actually helps channel divine power. But legend says Apollo once loved a goddess named Daphne, who turned into a laurel tree to escape his love. So Apollo wore a laurel crown, like trying to keep the taste of what he could never have. You do too. You don't eat it, just chew, and keep that bitter flavor in your mouth like a reminder. These words aren't yours. This body isn't either. Today, you are just a doorway. Breakfast. No cheese, no honey bread. Just a pinch of dry seeds and a few sips of water. Just enough to keep you from becoming a hungry ghost. No love, no touch, no belonging to anyone. That's the condition of the job. You belong to Apollo. Every hair you lose, every dream you dream, every time you look at someone too long, might be seen as no longer pure. You once loved, long ago. He once touched your hand, just once, helping you cross a slippery stone step. A moment brief as wind brushing hair, but you held it in dreams for years. Once, you dreamed you were held. The next morning, you were so scared you meditated beside the statue for 2 days, begging forgiveness for sinning in a dream. Since then, you've learned not to sleep on your side, because side sleeping invites dreams. A stray cat slips past your foot as you return to the main temple. You look at it looks at you, then both turn away, like having seen a part of yourselves no one wants to mention. And then you sit down on the stone seat again, preparing for a new day. No one knows what you'll say today, not even you. You only know one thing. Today, the god will choose you, or not. And if not, you'll just sit there, in silence, waiting, and breathing with the stone smoke. Some mornings the god doesn't come. No word, no signal, no shifting breeze. You sit there for 3 full watches, only hearing your stomach growling and your back aching. Once, you wondered, if you faked hearing something, would anyone notice? You almost did. But then, the smoke changed color, from white to pale blue. You don't know why. You just know you stood up and bowed to the god in apology, even without a word spoken. Since then, you'd rather sit still and stay silent than make up a voice that isn't yours. There's a truth no one says out loud. You, the prophet Pythia, never speak plainly. Not because you don't want to, but because you're not allowed. You're the spokesperson for Apollo, the god of light, truth, and poetry. But the problem is, he prefers poetry over clarity. So every time he sends a message, it's not like getting an email. It's more like being handed a song lyric, written in ancient script, slightly burned around the edges by smoke. You hear things like, The horse runs towards sunset, but darkness grows from the east. Then you have to turn that into a prophecy for the person asking, who just crossed mountains, rivers, and brought chicken offerings just to ask, should I marry her? So you smile, nod, and deliver the god's words in a mysterious tone. If the heart goes before the feet, happiness may lose the road. They fall silent, moved. Thank you with 2 goats. You don't dare say, you didn't fully get it either. But it's fine. In this profession, the vaguer, the holier. You once saw a warrior ask, will I win the battle? The god replied, the great city shall fall. So the warrior rushed into battle, thinking the enemy would lose. Just like Croesus, king of Lydia, once asked Delphi if he would win if he attacked the Persians. Pythia replied, if you cross the Halys River, a great empire shall fall. Croesus was thrilled, then lost his entire kingdom. History remembers him as the man who started a war by misinterpreting a divine metaphor. You, at that time, just stayed silent, watching smoke drift slowly, wondering when the god would finally say something clear for once. The result? His own city burned first. You sat there sighing, silently asking if anyone ever understood the god right. You learned how to speak in a way that is both correct and unsuable. Some seasons the god is especially ambiguous. Spring prophecies speak of blooming new beginnings, but no one knows what's blooming or where. Summer is full of light and burning metaphors, like when someone asks about marriage, the god says, let not fire burn the dry roof. Winter is a nightmare, heavy smoke, lazy god, prophecies like, the wind has lost its way, the shadow won't return. You gradually learn. Each season, each smoke, each divine phrase is a reminder that you should speak in images, and that, if it rains, best to say nothing. Just look up and say, the god isn't ready today. You learn to repeat words, use nature imagery, and always avoid names. You turn every prophecy into a riddle poem, so the god is pleased, and mortals take responsibility if they get it wrong. Because once it leaves the temple, your words outlive you. Right or wrong, they'll be carved in stone, retold as myth, and reenacted in tragic plays. You're not just a translator of divinity, you're a maker of legend. You're Google Translate of the ancient world, but a version that only works if the user knows how to ask and is willing to hear an answer that's not easy to swallow. You don't speak the truth, but you don't lie either. You just speak the way the god does. And sometimes that's all the world needs. A little vagueness, a bit of poetry, and a whole lot of blame on fate. As Pythia, you get asked a lot of things, so many that you can't even remember your own name anymore, but you can recall exactly who asked, if I plant watercress on a new moon, will the gods bless it? Imagine you're the microphone for Apollo, and every day dozens of people line up to speak into you, things they wouldn't dare say to anyone else. Some ask serious questions. Should I attack Sparta in the spring? Others are not sure which dimension they're living in. Is my soul riding a whale through the night sky? You sit there, eyes closed, inhaling smoke, and think to yourself, oh Apollo, please don't make me translate this again. Once, someone brought in a cracked egg and asked, if it hatches into 2 chicks, does that mean I'll have twins? You answered with a dreamy tone, when life splits in 2, what has not happened yet already has a shadow. She nodded like she understood, shed a tear, then took the egg home to worship. You sat there shaking, 'cause you just made it up. There was a poet once, laurel wreath on his head, clutching a scroll almost as long as he was tall. He bowed and asked, "My poetry, does it please the muses?" You held the smoke in for a long time, then said, "If your words stir the wind, the hearts of men will remain restless." He burst into tears. Wind blew through a stone crevice. Actually, someone had just opened the back door. You turned away, covering your face, to hide a smile filled with pity. A young general came quietly, looked around, then whispered, "If I hide my lover's body among the spoils of war to bring it home, will the gods punish me?" You froze. Then whispered, "He who carries the unnamed shall not hold victory with both hands." He nodded, thanked you, then vanished into history, leaving behind only a rumor that he never lost a battle, but never slept through the night. A well-dressed statesman from Athens, voice full of calculation, asked, "If I use a little trickery to win votes in the council, will the gods punish me?" You replied slowly, "He who plants a crooked tree will harvest tangled shadows." He nodded as if absorbing deep wisdom. 2 months later he was ousted by his own scheme. You were gifted a goat for your divine foresight. A nervous young man came clutching a bouquet and, "A goat?" he asked. "If I give her this goat, will she agree to marry me?" You sat up straight, inhaled smoke, then replied with a poetic, ambiguous voice, "If sincerity lies in the horn, then where does the heart lie?" The young man bowed as if understanding something profound, then left. A year later, you heard he married someone else. You still remember the confused look on his face that day, and the goat. It got lost in the temple courtyard for 3 days. Before that, a pregnant woman came to the temple, her eyes full of hope. She asked, "Oh God, will my child be a boy or a girl?" You inhaled smoke, stared into space, then said, "You shall give birth to what is not desired, but what is needed." She stayed silent for a long while, then nodded, leaving behind a tiny bracelet. You don't know what she gave birth to, but you remember the way she held her belly as she walked away, as if carrying a divine command home. A merchant once asked, "Should I sell the plot next to Artemis's shrine to open a pastry shop?" You were about to say, "Up to you," but instead you blew smoke and said, "He who sprinkles honey on the altar shall taste the flavor of prosperity, but must endure the ants that come." He built the pastry shop, very successful. Since then, he returns each season, bringing you almond cookies. You never told him. You're allergic to almonds. And then there were the questions, beyond human handling. If I love the child of my ex-husband's sister, but still live with my first love, will fate allow it? You could only inhale deeply, then say, "When rivers meet, beware your boat drifting into a whirlpool." She nodded gratefully, as if you'd just drawn her a marriage plan. You just tried not to fall off your stone seat. All of these questions, from grand to ridiculous, had one thing in common. They came because they believed you were connected to the God, even if you were making it up, even if you were sleepy, even if the God that day only hinted through a cold breeze. You still had to speak, and speak, in a way that made them believe the answer they received was the most sacred thing they'd ever heard. That wasn't just prophecy. That was spiritual performance, where the audience cried because you were inhaling smoke and whispering poetry. A performance with no script, but one people would remember for the rest of their lives. Some days, you just want to say, I don't know, stop asking. But you can't, because you are Pythia, the intermediary between God and man, between vagueness and bloody decisions. A king arrives, his beard braided with gold thread, sitting before you as if he invented war. He is Croesus, king of Lydia. So rich people say he washes his hands in honey and wipes his sweat with silk. He asks, if I attack the east, will I destroy an empire? You, sitting in smoke, sigh, thinking about your breakfast still unsettled. Then you answer, if you cross the river Halys, an empire will fall. He nods, thanks you, and offers you a golden cup, an ivory chair, and 12 gemstones. Then departs, and it's his empire that falls. He is captured alive, nearly burned, and later, saved because the Persian king is moved by your story. You sit there looking at the golden cup, then over at the uncomfortable ivory chair, and wonder, Apollo, should I give them back? That wasn't the first time. A general from Thebes once asked you, should we ally with Sparta to attack Athens? You'd just been bitten by a mosquito on your toe. The smoke was too thick. You were irritated. So you said, when the lion and the wolf hunt together, the sparrow should fly far. Sounds wise, but they allied anyway. And then, most of them died arguing who was the lion and who was the wolf. There was also a nobleman from Corinth, curly beard like grapevines and a voice full of drama, who asked, will Athena side with me if I overthrow the city council? You, at that moment with a headache from too much smoke, replied, when the god's shadow falls on the wall, the one with a mirror should beware the back. He nodded, like he'd heard some superior strategy. A month later, he was dragged through the marketplace by townsfolk after his betrayal was exposed by the mailman. You begin to understand. People don't come to hear the will of the gods. They come to legitimize what they already want to do. You are just a stamp, smoky and mysteriously shiny. But once, a group of messengers from a small city-state called Abdera came and asked, if we offer 10 goats and 50 jars of wine, will the gods change our destiny? You, hungry and suspicious the wine was watered down, said, when goats drink wine, it's not the gods, but the drunks who answer. They carefully took notes. A year later, that city was flooded because they built the grain warehouse too close to the river. You heard the news and sighed, I should have been clearer about irrigation. But that stamp sometimes seals a death sentence for an entire nation. One day you were sick, feverish. You asked for a break, but they said, no, the Persian ambassador is waiting. You sat there trembling, mouth full of smoke, head spinning. Then you said something you remembered from a play the night before. He who walks toward the sea will see his shadow melt. The ambassador nodded, then decided to launch a naval invasion. 3 months later, they were sunk by the Athenian navy. You shivered, not from guilt, but because you were still feverish, and you started seeing a talking owl circling the cave ceiling. You begin to understand. Every word you speak, no matter how vague, can kill a city-state. And people never blame the god. They blame you. Someone whispered, you were a witch. Another said, you were paid off by Athens. Once, you received an anonymous letter, written in goat blood or very cheap red ink. If my city falls, you will be next. You folded the letter, used it as a bookmark, but there were also days when you said something, and a miracle happened. A young girl once came and asked, "Should I run away from an arranged marriage?" You said, "She who chooses wind as her path will reach where there are no maps." She ran away for real, and 2 years later she came back, a poet, carrying a thin collection titled "From Wind to Smoke, Thank You, Pythia." You smiled, not because of the thanks, but because you still remember that day was so clear, no smoke, and you spoke in your own voice. But the next day, a king came and asked, "If I attack my neighbor during the festival, will the gods be angry?" You inhaled smoke and replied, "When trumpets drown prayers, blood does not wait for permission." He didn't understand and attacked anyway. 3 months later, he was executed during the autumn festival. You sit there, alone, in smoke, among echoes of empires that once believed you were the Google Translate of the gods. You want to say, "I'm just a person. I don't know the future. I only speak what the god whispers, or what I imagine." But you can't, because if a Pythia says, "I don't know," all of Greece might stop turning. And so you continue, saying words that can save or kill, while no one asks you the one question you've always wanted to hear. Are you okay? No one wants to talk about this, but you know well, there are days when even the gods are tired, or the smoke is too thick, or you misspeak. And when that happens, everything gets very bad. Once you said, "The rabbit will surpass the ox." Sounds wise enough, until the king who heard that prophecy assumed he should attack Macedon because they were weaker. 3 weeks later, he died in a trap set by a unit of bunny cavalry from Macedon. Yes, they wore fake bunny ears on their helmets. Yes, they won. And yes, you were pelted with dried tomatoes for an entire week. Another time, just as unfortunate and hilarious, you said, "Black water will cure thin blood." People interpreted that as drinking wine instead of blood transfusion. 30 people got poisoned from homemade wine mixed with tree resin. You were publicly shamed in every stone-carved news slab in IKEA. One headline screamed, "Delphi, when the gods caused collective diarrhea." There was also a time you said, "Slowing down is wisdom." But the scribe, a trainee, miswrote it as, "Attacking immediately is wisdom." Result, a small city-state believed it was the ideal time to counterattack Thebes. They failed after 2 days. The surviving leader returned to Delphi, demanding the prophecy be proofread. You apologized and blamed a spelling error by the god. A few weeks later, an old physician came and asked, "Should I use incense ash to treat leprosy?" You, at that point sleep-deprived for 3 nights straight, responded curtly, "Fire leaves marks, but where there are marks, there will be scars." He nodded, went home, ground incense and mixed it with sheep fat, then applied it to patient's skin. They blistered like grilled fish. 3 months later, you received a wooden statue placed outside your cave of a man scratching himself with a sign, "To Pythia, who made a whole nation itch." But then there was another time, more political and scarier. You said, "Winds from the south will extinguish fire from the east." A harmless, vague phrase, or so you thought. But Athens was then debating whether to conquer a region in the east. Your words were used by the anti-war faction as their main slogan. Even the gods are against the war. The other side was furious, accusing you of taking bribes from Sparta. Rumors spread that Pythia had been manipulated by gold and fat goats. An emergency assembly was held in Delphi, demanding prophecies be reviewed before being released. You sat curled up in your cave thinking, I was just talking about the weather. And of course, let's not forget the time you accidentally coughed and said, East, eastern wind. The secretary thought it was a prophecy and recorded it. A messenger from Byzantium read the phrase and decided to build a new harbour facing the eastern wind. Result: 30 ships wrecked due to opposing waves. You were nicknamed Monsoon Pythia for 3 straight years. You started learning to stay silent at the right moments. When the smoke is too thick, you just cough gently. When you don't understand, you say phrases that are absolutely meaningless, like, a fish that hides itself is a fish not caught. People will interpret it themselves, nod at it themselves, blame themselves if it's wrong, because that's the art of survival as a prophet. However, once you decided to tell the truth, the god shows me nothing. The room fell completely silent. The messenger looked at you like you were a cracked vase. Then he shouted, false prophet. You were chased out of the temple, lost a sandal, and nearly slipped into the Castalian spring. From that day, you learned an important lesson. Honesty only works when you've retired. You kept going, speaking just vague enough, just abstract enough, just poetic enough. No one knows you're afraid. No one asks if you were wrong. And that's the saddest thing. In a world that worships prophecy, no one forgives a prophet who misses a note. This morning, someone from Athens came. He looked you up and down, then asked, so which number Pythia are you? You answered, the 16th. He nodded, jotted it down. Not the golden age. You know that well. No one needs to say it. It's in the eyes of the faithful as they walk into the cave. It's the disappointment when they don't see you, glowing or sprouting wings. It's the familiar question. You're the real Pythia, right? You're just the one covering the shift, not the golden era when Pythia's words were carved into stone, not the time of Bacchus, the nomadic prophet whose poems were etched into cliffs, not like the Sibyl, a prophetess with her own myths, even books named after her. You're the name no one can remember, the poetry girl from that one day, the one with the smoky voice during a spring no one recorded. Sometimes people even blame you for someone else's failed prophecy. A nobleman from Sparta once asked you, are you the one who said the great one will die in the storm? You sighed. No, that was the 12th Pythia. He shrugged. Same difference. You began to understand the feeling of a mislabeled herb jar. You once heard the story of King Croesus, so rich he could gold-plate his own bathhouse floors, who sent messengers to Delphi with a simple question. Should I attack the Persian Empire? Pythia answered, if the king crosses the river Halys, a great empire will fall. Croesus was thrilled, thinking it was a blessing of victory. Who knew the empire that fell was his? That's when you realized fame sometimes comes from being wrong, in the right way. You once tried speaking that vaguely, but someone in the crowd yelled, just say it straight, I don't have time to decode theology. You fell silent because famous prophets get to be mysterious. But you have to be as clear as a marketplace price sign. Once, someone even asked, "Can you recite poetry like the 14th Pythia?" You answered, "No, she was good at turning words into smoke." They sighed, "What kind of prophet can't do poetry?" You almost said, "Are you here to ask the gods or enter a poetry contest?" But you just smiled, the kind of smile worn by someone underestimated who still has to maintain prophetic composure. Truth is, the poetry from the 14th era was just about harvests, figs, and the emotional state of a broom forgotten after winter. There are nights you wake up remembering the inscription for the first Pythia, called the Mouth of Apollo. You think your lips are chapped like hers. You breathe smoke too, but no one's carving your name anywhere. You are the forgotten prophet. No handwritten poems. No loyal followers ready to draw knives for you. When you cough, people think it's a prophecy. When you truly prophesy, they say, "The cough sounded better." You once asked yourself, "Why am I here? To keep tradition alive? Or just to give people someone to blame when fate isn't as pretty as they hoped?" One day, a little girl wandered into the temple. She sat beside you and asked, "Are you the person who talks to gods?" You smiled and shook your head. "No, I'm just someone trying to listen." And the little girl nodded, then softly said, "That's enough." In that moment, brief and simple, you felt yourself exist. No need to be Sibyl, no need to be Bacchus, no need for poems, no need for scribes. You just needed to sit among stone, listen, and keep the dreams of strangers from breaking too quickly. You also once heard the tale of Euthymenes, a male priest in Thebes who pretended to be a woman to get chosen as Pythia. He grew his hair, wore a white robe, practiced walking like a priestess, even fasted for 3 days to blur his vision like divine trance. Everything went well, until he raised his arm in prayer and revealed arm hair. A priestess noticed. Delphi was furious and held a smoke purification ritual that lasted 3 days and nights. From that, you learned. Being a prophet isn't just about speaking vaguely. It's also living vague enough that no one wants to fact-check you. You are not the most famous prophet. Sometimes you dream of standing in a marble square, surrounded by thousands kneeling. You speak, and every word turns to gold, recorded in red ink, read aloud at annual festivals. You are sculpted into stone. Your name is sung in Delphic hymns. Your verses etched into pillars in Athens. Then you wake up. In the crevice of stone, feet numb from the cold floor, throat dry from smoke, and the same mouse running across your toes each night. No one sings your name. No one builds your statue. Only the wind whistling through the mountains, as if rereading your dream in a language long forgotten. But you are the only one left tonight. The fire still burns, the smoke still swirls, and you still whisper the things people need to hear, more than the truth. You used to think prophecies were about telling the truth. Oh dear, no. After 3 springs, 7 summers, and countless backaches from bad meditation posture, you've realized one thing. No one comes here to hear the truth. They come to hear what they've already half believed. A mother walks in, clutching a small statue of Apollo. Her voice trembles. "My son. He says he wants to be a poet. won't marry, won't go to war. You inhale smoke, close your eyes, and reply, "He who is touched by the muse need not hold a spear." She beams with joy, placing a fig bread in your hand. You didn't lie, but you also didn't tell the truth. You simply guided an already existing hope and traded it for breakfast. Then there are times your words become divine decree. A politician from Argos once came, asking about an alliance with Athens. You saw the schemes in his eyes. You said, "Unite like two rivers, but if the water is muddy, wait for the dry season." He nodded like he'd heard divine law. 2 months later, he returned, announcing to his people, "Apollo has taught us to be patient and wait for our enemies to slip." He didn't mention you, but you didn't need to be mentioned, because you understand, a prophet isn't the one who earns credit. They are the excuse. There was one time you tried telling the truth. A young soldier asked you, "Should I go to war?" You saw the old scar on his hand, saw the unease in his eyes, and the unsent letter in his fabric pouch. You said, "No, stay home, grow grapes, and write to that girl." He nodded, but his eyes were full of sadness. 3 days later, a commander came to the temple, threw a dead chicken at your feet and hissed, "You cost us a soldier." You realized then, even when you're right, they don't want the right answer. They just want faith that matches the ending they've already written. From then on, you learned how to speak in a way that makes people nod. Not because they understand, but because they want to understand. You no longer seek truth, because truth is a fragile concept, as fleeting as the incense smoke you suck in every morning. You also realized prophecy is like a sugar-coated pill painted gold. It doesn't cure, but it makes people believe they'll get better. A young merchant once came, fearful of his upcoming voyage. You looked at him and gently said, "Favorable winds will come when your heart no longer doubts." He didn't fully grasp it, but walked away smiling. 3 days later, the sea calmed, the winds rose, and he told everyone at the harbor, "The God helped me through prophecy." You didn't stop him, because belief, once formed, creates its own wind to keep one's boat afloat. You find ways to help listeners leave the temple feeling lighter. One day, a retired Pythia came to visit. She sat down, squinted through the smoke and said, "When I was young, we could say anything. The people just needed to believe the God was speaking. But now they want logic, evidence, and receipts." You laughed because it was too true. Today, every prophecy must include a hint of philosophy, a dramatic punch, and sometimes a catchy slogan. Prophet has turned from a divine trance into a job with KPIs, even if what they believe in is something you just made up from thin air. And sometimes your words are quoted in ways you never imagined. You once told a general, "He who does not see his shadow is more likely to fall into the abyss." You said it because he forgot his helmet. A year later, that phrase was used to draft anti-rebellion laws in Thebes. They said, "The God teaches that one who doesn't know their place will cause disaster." You saw your name miscarved into stone, not Pythia, year 3, cycle 7, but the voice of the God in the dark. You chuckled dryly. The God didn't say that. But now it seems he did. And strangely, sometimes they make your words come true, because they act on them, believe in them, love, fight, and pray through them. And just like that, you become a real prophet, not because you foresaw the future, but because you helped them walk into that future with their eyes closed. You are not a liar. You are a planter of ideas. You are the echo of what they're too afraid to say. And sometimes you are the first to name what they didn't dare believe they already knew. There's one thing no one tells you before becoming a prophet. You no longer belong to yourself. No more birth date, only the year you began speaking the language of the god. No more personal name, just the title, bearer of Apollo's breath. No more thoughts, only words delivered from the crevice in the rock. You used to like honey boiled in warm milk. Now you eat only dried seeds, and you're not allowed to complain. You once loved a shepherd whose face was as gentle as the first wine of the season. Now you must forget, because a Pythia must not be loved. The one who loves a Pythia is seen as one who taints the god's voice. You once wanted to go down the mountain, to visit your mother, just once, just to tell her you're okay, even though your skin is blistering from inhaling too much cedar smoke. But a Pythia must not leave the temple. One who leaves the temple will break the trance, and when that happens, all of Delphi won't know what the god thinks about this year's autumn. You are a living speaker. Every day you open your mouth, broadcast the divine, then close it, return to being. No one asks what you dream of. No one asks if you're afraid. No one writes your name when you're gone. Only Apollo's name is carved, and the 29th prophet of the third era. One time, you used your finger to draw your name into the dust on the altar, when no one was looking. Just one letter, the first letter of the name your mother gave you. That afternoon, the wind blew. The name disappeared. No one noticed. Only you, standing there, like a statue never carved. Some prophets are honored. Statues are built. They're mentioned in epics. But those are the ones who say what kings want to hear. You're just the doorkeeper on ordinary days. Days with no war, no omens. Just townsfolk asking for safety for their harvest, for their cow not to die, for their son not to leave school and follow the Spartan army. You are not a legend. You are the shadow that keeps the legend's dream going. And that's why you must stay silent, live lightly, love without making a sound. Because if the god hears, he might cut your breath like cutting thread in a ritual. You do not die, but you don't live either. You exist, in quotation marks. At first you truly believed that the smoke rising from the earth was the breath of the god. Believed that the trembling in your bones was the voice of Apollo. Believed that you were chosen. But then, one prophecy was wrong. Someone died from misunderstanding it. A child cried in the temple, asking why the god took their mother away. And there was no one to answer except you, coughing through the smoke. You began to doubt. Maybe the god wasn't speaking. Maybe you heard it wrong. Or maybe no one was speaking at all. Just the rock crevice, the methane gas, and the words you made up. Because you couldn't say, I don't know. But you still had to perform. Because every time you opened your mouth, a city paused a war. A woman dared to keep her child. A king changed his mind about beheading a leader. You knew, even though you no longer believed, they still did. And so you continued walking into the smoke room, continued sitting on the three-legged stool, continued shaking your head, inhaling deeply and beginning to speak in that voice that was both vague and convincing. One day, you met a young girl, the one who would replace you in 3 seasons. She sat beside you and whispered, "Do you really hear the God?" You smiled, but didn't answer. She looked at you, eyes full of doubt, just like yours used to be. And you realized, belief always comes in cycles. She would believe, then doubt, then still have to go on, just like you. You remembered a very cold night when the wind howled through the cliffs and you asked silently, "If the God is real, why doesn't he speak when I cry?" And the smoke just rose without answering. Since then, you stopped praying. You only performed the ritual. You no longer made offerings. You only played the part. You no longer spoke with the God. You only spoke so others could hear the God. You still kept your voice soft, still quietly placed your hand on your chest when closing your eyes, still trembled slightly, as if the God had touched your spine. But inside, it was empty. Only your voice remained, speaking to the massive silence and calling it the God. And you wondered how many prophets before you had sat like this, speaking words they no longer believed, but still tried to give them shape, so others could keep believing. No one gave a warning, no special sign. It was just a spring morning when you stepped into the stone chamber, and nothing happened. No scent, no smoke, no familiar dizziness you used to call being possessed. Only silence. A strange kind of silence, so deep you could hear your own heartbeat and feel like you were just a person. The temple guard asked, "Need more wood?" You shook your head. That smoke wasn't from wood. It was gas from deep within the earth, from ancient fissures once believed to be the breath of the God. And now, that fissure had gone silent. No one knew why. Some said the earth's flow had shifted. Others claimed the God had left. And you, sitting in that stone room, could only quietly stare at the half-burned incense and whisper, "So, it's over." No one believed it right away. Villagers still brought offerings. Kings still sent envoys. A young girl, the one meant to replace you, still stood before a bronze mirror, practicing how to hear the God's voice. You couldn't bring yourself to say the truth. You just looked at her and said, "When the smoke comes, breathe deep. When it doesn't, still do the same." Gradually, the pilgrimages dwindled. Delphi was no longer the center of the world. Rome rose. New gods appeared, and Apollo, the god of light, was replaced by wooden crosses. One day, you returned to that chamber alone. No more guards, only stone, dust, and sunlight leaking through the cracked wall. You sat in your old place, leaning against the wall. No more smoke, and for the first time in years, you breathed as yourself. No trembling, no pretending to hear something outside yourself. You only heard yourself. You whispered, "If you're still there, I want to thank you. Even when you were silent, you helped me not be alone." No one answered, and oddly enough, you didn't feel sad, because you knew sometimes gods are just another name for loneliness with a shape. You stood up, brushed the dust off your robe, stepped out of the temple, no longer as a prophet, but as someone who once knew something and kept it until the end. The Battle of Thermopylae. 300 warriors against an empire. It is one of the most famous battles in history, a clash between Greek city-states led by Leonidas of Sparta and the Persian Empire under King Xerxes the Great. It lasted approximately 3 days, and it wasn't quiet. The battle happened at the same time as the naval clash at Artemisium, in late summer, in the year 480 before Christ. The place was called Thermopylae, the Hot Gates. It wasn't just strategy, it was vengeance. This was the second Persian invasion of Greece, a response to their first failure, after the Athenians defeated the Persian army at Marathon 10 years earlier. Xerxes gathered a massive army and navy. Ancient writers claimed he brought over 1 million men, but modern estimates say maybe 70,000 to 300,000. Still, it was an empire on the move. 7,000 Greek soldiers marched north to block the pass during the summer of that year. They chose the narrowest spot, the only road south. For 2 days, a small Greek force under Leonidas of Sparta held off the entire Persian advance. And then, betrayal. A man named Ephialtes revealed a secret mountain path behind the Greeks. When Leonidas learned of the flanking move, he dismissed most of his men. Only 300 Spartans stayed behind, along with 700 Thespians and 400 Thebans. They made their final stand. Most were killed. Only a few escaped. If you've ever seen an elephant step onto a red carpet, then imagine an empire stepping onto ancient Greece. It wasn't quiet. It wasn't humble. It brought dust, drums, fire, and pride so thick it poured like boiling tar. His name was Xerxes, son of Darius the Great, the same man who tasted bitter defeat at Marathon. Xerxes wasn't born to rule, but when his father died, power hit him like a sea storm. He had no choice but to seize the throne, a court full of schemers, provinces on the verge of rebellion. Xerxes knew if he didn't prove himself, he wouldn't keep the crown for long. And there was this. Marathon wasn't just a defeat. It was a national insult. He didn't come to negotiate. He came with one goal, to make Greece bow. No bow, then kneel. The Persian Empire stretched wide, from the Aegean Sea to India, from burning deserts to snow-covered peaks. This was an empire with a powerful army, massive treasures, and a belief that it was born to rule the world. But to strike Greece, Xerxes had to do something no one had ever done before. Build a bridge across the sea. Not a stone bridge, not a wooden one. A floating bridge made of warships. Over 674 vessels tied together with iron chains forged in Lydia, decked with cedar planks from the Zagros Mountains. A structure that not only crossed water, but also crossed the limits of imagination. Engineers built a wooden road swaying over the waves, as if Persia could turn the ocean into a sidewalk. Beautiful, majestic. And, in the fury of nature, just after a few nights, a summer storm from the north tore through the chains, overturned the ships, and drowned hundreds. The sea answered with a roaring, "No, Xerxes, not today." You think Xerxes gave up? No. He ordered the sea to be whipped, literally, not a metaphor. He punished Poseidon with a royal sentence. 300 lashes of leather, chains thrown into the waves, and orders to discipline the sea like a misbehaving soldier. Punish the ocean like a lazy private. 300 lashes, cuffed waves. Then he rebuilt the bridge, stronger this time, more arrogant, and he led the largest army of ancient history across it. Historian Herodotus claimed over 2 million men. Of course, he exaggerated, like a TED Talk speaker on caffeine. But even the realistic figure, about 150,000 to 300,000, was a marching nightmare. Along came cavalry from Bactria, archers from Scythia, spearmen from Assyria, war elephants from India, the immortals, soldiers rotated to always keep their number at exactly 10,000, an empire moving like a sandstorm that thinks, and all of it heading south toward Greece, like a finger pointing at the one who dared say no. But Greece wasn't a country. It was a loose network of city-states: Sparta, Athens, Thebes, Corinth, Delphi. Each had its own laws, its own money, and its own ego. They hated each other year-round, competing in everything from sports to poetry, from myths to markets. But when they saw the Persian army eating up the land on its way down, they sat down together for the first time, because they understood divided means dead. Sparta, stubborn, silent, practical, agreed to send troops. Athens, wealthy, rational, full of drama, sent ships. Others hesitated, stalled, or waited to see who would win. But in that moment of chaos, an idea emerged. If you can't win with numbers, win with location. If you can't block the sea, force it through a narrow bottleneck, and block that bottleneck with a shield. That bottleneck was called Thermopylae, and the one holding the shield would be Sparta. There are choices in life that aren't made to win, but so you don't feel ashamed looking into a mirror. And Leonidas, king of Sparta, made one of those choices. His name means like a lion, not because he roared, but because he knew when to die without making a sound. Leonidas wasn't the eldest son of the king. He wasn't born to wear the crown. But when his brother gave up the throne for loving a woman of the wrong bloodline, Sparta had its fair share of romantic drama. Leonidas was chosen. Chosen for what? Because he was the only one left who hadn't made a mess. Not flashy, not impulsive, but there was something in his eyes that made people not want to turn away. And when the Greek city-states argued like preschoolers over fight or don't fight, Leonidas quietly stood up. He didn't need a popular vote. He didn't need a referendum on the agora. Sparta had laws, and the law said, when the homeland calls, the king carries the shield first. But there was a small problem. The Carnea festival was happening, one of the holiest religious festivals in Sparta, and the law forbade taking the army to war during it, and Spartans were as stubborn as dry wood soaked in vinegar. They'd rather lose than break tradition. So Leonidas found a way, not breaking the law, but not turning away either. He didn't bring the whole army. He picked just 300 men, the best, most battle-worn, and most importantly, all of them had sons. No young recruits, no shaky hands in their first battle. They were veteran Spartiads, survivors of the agoge, the training system called Ari's School of Life. They weren't chosen for being the biggest or strongest, but for not blinking at the sight of a blade, because they knew how to stand without stepping back, and because they were ready to die without needing a promise they'd be remembered. Sparta didn't send 300 warriors. Sparta sent 300 living wills. Before departure, there were no farewell horns or tearful goodbyes, only short nods, Spartan style, not romantic, not tearful, just very quiet and very real. A mother stuffed a pouch of dry bread into her son's hand, patted his shoulder like he was off to school, not death. A Spartan child watched his father adjust his helmet strap and was told, "I go so you can grow up free." No one begged to stay. No one walked further than one step past the gate. Because they understood, you don't see someone off to die with tears, but with a silence big enough to hold the roar inside. If they died, Sparta lived. If they won, Greece would remember. If they didn't return, at least they didn't leave the path open for Persia. But you know what's strangest? Not one of those 300 objected. They didn't ask why. They didn't demand pay, didn't cry, didn't write final letters. They adjusted their helmet straps, looked north, and began walking. Joining them were a few thousand reinforcements from other city-states, Thespiae, Phocis, Thebes. But everyone knew the 300 Spartans were the core. They weren't going for glory. They weren't aiming to be heroes carved into stone. They went because someone had to stand at that choke point, and they didn't want someone else to carry that burden. Before that, Sparta had sent messengers to the Delphi oracle to ask Apollo's will. The answer was a short, cold prophecy. Either a Spartan king must die, or the city of Sparta will be destroyed. No one argued. No one asked to revise it. Leonidas heard and nodded as if receiving marching orders. On the road to Thermopylae, it was said Leonidas stopped at many temples. He offered incense, not to pray for victory, but to die the right way. And his wife, Gorgo, the sharpest woman in Sparta, told him a very short line as she sent her husband off. "Come back with your shield, or on it." At that narrow pass, he carried no illusions, no maps marked for victory, no clever tricks to turn the tide, only shields, spears, discipline, and a will that didn't move. You might call it foolish. You might say that was organized suicide. But to a Spartan, that was the truest form of life they could choose. The sea breeze from the Gulf of Mali slaps your face like a wet towel. In front of you is the narrow mountain pass of Thermopylae, where the land is only wide enough for a few carts to pass. On either side are sheer cliffs, as if god Hephaestus himself had carved them with a chisel. On one side is the sea, not for swimming, but for drowning if you step back wrong. On the other side is the mountain, not for hiding, but for the enemy to throw rocks from above. That pass is about 6 to 7 kilometers long, but there are spots so narrow that even 2 goats would have to tilt their horns to get through. The Greeks called this place the Gate of Fire, because if the Persians wanted to go on, they had to step through the steel flame waiting here. Behind them was a trap both sides knew well. Retreat was not an option. And then they came, the Persian army, not a few thousand, not a few tens of thousands, but hundreds of thousands according to Herodotus, so many that a horse's spit could hit someone. Some carried bows, others axes, mercenaries from every land, Medes, Saka, Bactria, Egypt, and even Arab islanders riding hunchbacked camels. That army wasn't like an army, but like a centipede that could move, with thousands of legs, thousands of voices, and one head, Xerxes. And standing in the way of that flood was a wall of shields. Xerxes sat on a makeshift throne, peering through a bronze scope. He saw his soldiers advance, get pushed back, then fall apart like tangled thread. He saw some Greek soldiers swap out shifts, while others sat combing their hair, plucking lyres, or practicing combat. He didn't understand. A bunch of lunatics or people unafraid of death? The historian Plutarch later wrote, "The Spartans combed their hair before battle as a ritual, as if saying, 'I will die with my hair in place.'" The entire Persian army saw it and began to feel chills, no taller than a man's chest. No spiked wood stakes or metal barricades, just 300 bronze Spartan shields and a few thousand Greek allies forming a fixed ring of steel. On the first day, the Persians started with trumpet blasts. Xerxes sent in the Medes and Scythians, a mid-tier force, hoping to quickly eliminate this stubborn Greek group. And then they shattered like beer foam hit with a bronze cup. Sparta didn't fight like normal men. They stood in rows, not because they didn't know how to run, but because they refused to retreat. That was the phalanx, a classical battle formation, as terrifying as a wall that stabs. Each soldier covered part of his own body with his shield, and the rest was to protect the comrade beside him. They locked shoulders, pressed shields to shields, and raised spears into dense rows like a forest of steel bamboo. From the outside, you'd see a mobile block of bronze, with no gaps, no individuals. From the inside, the Spartans heard each other's breathing, felt whether the hand beside them trembled, and no one let another fall first. Lower shields, raise spears, and do not move. When the enemy charged in, they didn't yell or scream. They lowered their spear tips and stabbed as if picking grapes from a vine. Blood flowed, sand got wet, the wind carried the scent of iron and sweat. But no one retreated. Behind them, there was no way out. In front, wave after wave of human bodies. And in their hearts, a saying no one needed to repeat. Spartans don't ask how many enemies, they only ask, where are they standing? That night in the Persian camp, no one slept soundly. Mercenaries whispered to each other in different tongues, but with the same worry. Those savages, why aren't they dead yet? Rumors spread fast that Spartan soldiers didn't tire, that they didn't need food, that they were personally trained by the god of war, Ares. Psychological warfare came not from words, but from relentless silence, and Thermopylae was beginning to drown the pride of an army that had never known defeat. Back at the Persian camp, the air began to feel thick like oil smoke. Xerxes, in his command tent on the hilltop, roared at his generals, tore up the battlefield maps, and smashed a luxurious Babylonian wine jug. He wasn't used to being blocked, wasn't used to watching his aces collapse right before his eyes. Outside, mercenaries from Egypt, India, Bactria sat in silence, not singing, not speaking. They looked at each other, then at the pass like it was a gate to hell. "We're dying here. For what reason?" someone whispered. No one answered. Meanwhile, in the Greek ranks, though blood stained their knees, they still knew why they were there. They feared no death. Spartan soldiers didn't retreat even when hit by arrows, didn't panic when surrounded, didn't scream even when stabbed. They just pushed their shields, switched positions, and kept slashing. One immortal saw his opponent struck by a spear, blood pouring into the sand. But he didn't fall. He just clenched his teeth, locked his shield into place, and nodded for his comrade to continue the line. "They don't fall?" the Persian soldier asked. "No," the one beside him whispered. "They already chose death." The immortals fought by royal command, The Spartans fought like they were defending their own homes. Second night, no war drums, no torchlight, only the sound of insects and the heavy breathing of a man running away from his own homeland. His name was Ephialtes, a Greek, a name that later, in Athens, would become synonymous with traitor. But that night, he wasn't yet a traitor, just someone abandoned in a world that worshipped only strength. Born with a hunched back, uneven shoulders, arms that couldn't hold a round shield, he couldn't fit into a phalanx, where everyone had to stand shoulder to shoulder, shield against shield, stepping in sync. Ephialtes grew up with pitiful glances. No one taught him how to fight. No one needed him to learn. When he walked into Leonidas's camp, his eyes still had a spark. He didn't ask for glory, just to stand in line, to be part of something bigger. But Sparta didn't accept those who couldn't hold the formation, not out of cruelty, out of principle. A phalanx one beat out of sync, and the whole line dies. Ephialtes was rejected, not with a whip, with silence. He turned away, bit his lip until it bled. He went to Leonidas's camp, asked to hold a spear and stand in line. But Sparta didn't take those who couldn't keep the ranks, not out of cruelty, out of principle. A phalanx one beat out of sync, and the whole line dies. Ephialtes wasn't chosen. He turned away, bit his lip until it bled. That night, he followed the mountain crevice to the Persian camp. The Anapaea path appeared like a thread through the forest's hair, narrow, damp, rarely used. It was a crack. Only locals knew of it, and only someone like Ephialtes, the one never allowed to stand in rank, would step into it. At the Persian camp, he didn't need permission. Just raised a hand, pointed the way. And Xerxes, furious after 3 days of being stalled at the pass, seized the chance like a starving man grabbing bread. He showed Xerxes a route winding through the forest, leading to the rear of the Spartan position. A narrow trail, known only to locals, a name, Anapaea. Far from the camp, at the foot of the mountain, someone saw flames, flickering like animal eyes in the forest. An old goat herder at the mountain's base, checking her herd in the morning, found ash flakes on the leaves. No one listened to them. No one wanted to believe. But even nature was whispering about something crawling in silently from behind. "They won't see us coming," Ephialtes said, "and when they turn around, there'll be no way out." Betrayal didn't start with a knife, but with words. The next morning, Leonidas got word from the guards. Mountain villagers had spotted strange footprints. Persian campfires appeared behind the ridge. No one panicked. No one fled. Leonidas just turned to his troops and said a single sentence. "Who wants to leave may leave." Some Greek soldiers from other city-states withdrew at Sparta's urging, because Sparta's death didn't have to mean Greece's death. Staying meant choosing death. Withdrawing meant saving lives to fight another day. But all 300 Spartans, none of them left. Alongside them, 700 Thespian soldiers also stayed. No one forced them to. They chose. Betrayal in history is a shadow, but the choice to stay is a flame. Leonidas knew he would die, but he also knew this death would not be meaningless. It would slow down Persia. It would unite Greece. It would become a blood-red flag hanging over every city-state. A reminder, freedom has a price. When the light appeared, it meant darkness had finished its deal. The mountain pass was captured. Persian forces closed in from both sides. Leonidas showed no change in expression. No one removed their armor. No one dropped their spears. They withdrew to a small mound, easier to defend, where the fallen had already been laid. A circle, 300 men, one final day. Within the Greek ranks, some had lost wives to war, some lost children to plague, some were 20-year-old boys who'd never been in love, and even old men who volunteered because they didn't want to die in bed. They chose Thermopylae not to win, but to die in the right place. The immortals began to falter. When the wind blew ash into their eyes, their arrows missed. When they tripped over their comrades' bodies, their steps stumbled. When they heard the low growl of Spartan warriors, a sound more like wolves than men, they slowed. And the phalanx didn't forgive hesitation. One beat too slow, a spear straight into your gut. The second day ended under a sunset soaked in blood. The Spartans still straightened their ranks, still wiped their spears, still combed their hair. And the immortals, they were replaced, and no one asked to return to the front line. And at that moment, somewhere in the woods, a traitor began to open his mouth. Early morning, no bird song, no wind through the mountain pass, only the scent of old blood that hadn't dried from 3 days before, and the strange smell of smoke coming from behind. Leonidas stood alone, on the small mound where he had laid the bodies of the first fallen soldiers. In his mind echoed a sentence, not from the living, but from the distant temple of Delphi. A king from the line of Heracles must die to save Greece. It wasn't a warning, it was a sentence. He had known that since he left Sparta, since he looked into the eyes of the priestess and didn't ask again. Not everyone believes in the gods, but in Sparta, dying at the right time was also a political duty. His look wasn't fear, it was confirmation. The Persian army was coming from both sides. The phalanx couldn't turn. There was no way back, and no path to victory. Then he returned to the camp, not to call for sacrifice. No speeches, no tears. Just one sentence. Who wants to leave, may go, live, and tell the tale. Some allies withdrew. They weren't cowards, they were allowed. Leonidas wanted them to live and tell the world. Thermopylae happened. But the 300 Spartans, not one left. They didn't need to discuss, didn't need orders, because they had been raised for this. Since childhood, they were taught. Fear is the only thing that breaks your spear. Also staying were 700 men of Thespiae. No one made them, no glory, no poetry, just a chilling act of will. A young Spartan asked his general, "We can't win, so why stay?" The general pointed to the circle of bodies they had laid over the past 3 days. Because they no longer get to choose, so we choose for them, so they're not forgotten. Leonidas removed his helmet, not to lighten his head for battle, but to let the sunlight strike his eyes one last time. In that brief moment, he remembered childhood, the days of hunger and beatings in the Agoge training camps, not to make him stronger, but to strip him of fear. He once trembled from hunger, but never from death. From a boy left in snowy forests, to a warrior clad in blood-dark red, all of it led to this place. That night, they didn't celebrate. No farewell ceremony, only sharpened spears. Some silently cleaned the armor of fallen comrades. as if to carry them into the final fight. One soldier took a small knife, carved inside his shield. If you find this, I didn't survive, but I fought to the end. Someone retied their sandals. Someone adjusted a friend's armor. Each action, small, simple, felt like a ritual of self-farewell. Aligning shields, placing hands on each other's shoulders. Not a word, because they didn't need to speak. They had chosen. The dawn no longer rose, only smoke. Smoke from the fires behind, where the Persian army had crossed the Anapia path, and smoke from sweat, blood, and boiling despair. Leonidas stood in the middle of the pass. He gave no orders. He didn't need to. Everyone knew what to do. The first wave was the Persian light infantry, those who had mocked the barbaric Greeks. They thought they'd walk over Spartan corpses to advance. Before that came a rain of arrows. Persian archers filled the mountainsides, their arrows thick enough to blot out the sky. A Spartan looked up, then smirked. Good. At least we'll fight in the shade. Arrows struck shields, pierced arms, lodged in the ground like death markers. But the formation didn't budge. They were wrong. Sparta didn't fight pretty. They didn't dance with swords. They blocked, shoved, and stabbed straight into the throat. No screams, only the sound of metal tearing flesh. The ground slick with blood. No one stood firm, but no one stepped back. The first spears broke. They grabbed spears from the fallen, broke again. They drew short swords. Swords broke. They fought with bare hands, shields, rocks. Shields broke. They bit. One Spartan soldier lunged at an enemy's throat, biting until he suffocated, not from madness, but because it was the only way left to deal damage. In the chaos, Leonidas fell. No one knew which arrow. No one knew from which side. Only that he fell standing, hands still clutching the broken spear shaft. No one stopped. No one screamed. There was no time for grief. A young soldier fell, blood spreading across his red cloak. The man behind stepped forward, didn't look at the body, didn't bow. He just raised his shield and filled the gap. That's what they trained for all their lives. Not to protect their own lives, but to keep the formation unbroken. They weren't taught to die beautifully. They were taught to die in position. They say, when Leonidas died, the formation didn't falter. On the contrary, it tightened, struck deeper, as if his soul had entered the ranks, as if his death had left them with nothing more to hold on to. In the end, every Greek still alive was killed. No one escaped. No one betrayed. No one dropped their shield. And when the evening sky burned red, the wind flipped Leonidas's body. Persian General Mardonius approached. He looked down at the king's corpse. Didn't say a word. Didn't dare kick the body. Didn't dare touch it. Just quietly stepped back, as if before him lay not a body, but a god made manifest. No one survived, but the echo remained. Not the sound of swords, not the call of horns, but a whisper that refused to fade into the wind. 3 days after the battle, the Greeks still alive, from other city-states, returned to the narrow pass, not to find the living, but to find a promise. They picked up pieces of armor, recognized the name of an old friend from a small engraving behind a shield. No intact remains, only ashes, twisted metal, and a hollow feeling too deep to cry out. At the spot where Leonidas fell, they raised a small stone, carving with trembling hands the words, "O traveler, when you return to Laconia, tell the people that we lie here, obedient to their word. No cheering, no grandeur, just a slab, speaking for those who no longer had mouths to speak. News of the battle spread, from Sparta to Athens, from Athens across the sea to Egypt, from Egypt to Persia. Even in the king's hall of Xerxes, they whispered. They died, but they refused to disappear. Mardonius, the general who had trampled countless kingdoms, stood silent walking through the pass after victory. Leonidas's body, decapitated, nailed to a stake, was placed at the center of the Persian camp as a show of dominance. But even he couldn't look at it long. One night guards heard him mutter to himself, "We won, but why does it feel so cold?" An empire with millions had won, but as word reached Athens, Thebes, Corinth, people began to look at each other differently. At the Agora, the main square of Athens, an old man who once opposed Sparta stood among the crowd and quietly said, "I didn't like them, but they did what we haven't dared." No applause, only bowed heads. Leonidas, once seen as a war madman, became the reason Greeks began to think about unity. They couldn't make the mountain graveyard disappear. Leonidas didn't return, but he was present in every Greek military decision afterward. In Sparta's schools, children were taught his name before their own fathers. In Athens, even the poorest artists carved his image onto broken pottery, like a protective charm. In Corinth, new soldiers were given an old sword and told, "Like Leonidas, you don't need to survive, just stand firm." His name lived in slogans, in oaths, in the battles of Salamis, Plataea, and the heroic songs sung by campfires at night. One small battle with a few hundred men changed all of history, not because they won, but because they made the world remember one truth. Death doesn't silence anyone if they dare to lift their head one last time. Thermopylae fell, but that wasn't a period. It was a question mark, as large as a cloud of smoke drifting eastward. Xerxes kept marching. Athens was burned. The temple of Athena collapsed in flames, and the gods seemed to look away. There was nothing stopping the vast empire from swallowing Greece. Nothing, except what he couldn't see, a shame that refused to die. And strangely, even in victory, Xerxes couldn't celebrate. He stood on the ruined Acropolis, looking down on a smouldering city, and no one had surrendered. At night, some said they heard him whisper to General Mardonius, "I burned what they called sacred, but their souls haven't burned." From Athens' ruins, Themistocles, the politician once seen as eccentric, rose like fire from ashes. He didn't rouse the people with cheers, but with a plan to evacuate the entire population onto ships and make the sea their ally. "We will not face them on land. We will drown them in their own pride." The Battle of Salamis. A narrow strait, not so different from Thermopylae, but this time it was water instead of stone. Persia, with massive, heavy, arrogant ships, was lured into a space too tight to turn. Greek ships, small, swift, slicing like blades. They didn't fight to live. They fought to avenge. Legend says, when Xerxes saw his fleet shredded by tiny ships, he turned away, saying nothing. The slave walking beside him asked, "Your Majesty, we can still win." And he simply said, "To win without understanding the human spirit is only to hold temporary power over sand." Historians call it a victory of strategy. But behind every rammed hull, every shattered plank floating on the water, was the name of a friend who fell at Thermopylae. Then came Plataea, a year later. The Persians returned, this time without Xerxes, and the Spartans, who had been silent, finally led. This was the second Thermopylae. This time no one stepped back. Greeks from every city-state gathered, not for glory, but for an old oath. Many carved Leonidas's name into their weapons. Some young soldiers carried a shard of stone from the narrow pass like a talisman. The elders told of a dream. The night before the battle, they saw 300 shadows standing on a hill, saying nothing, only looking and nodding. On the fields of Plataea, they reformed the hoplite formation, just like the 300 before. A soldier at the end of the line whispered, "Today, we don't fight to die. We fight so those who died won't be forgotten." The Greeks won, not because they were stronger, but because the dead had left the living with no path backward. Thermopylae didn't save Greece. It severed the way back to cowardice. Leonidas didn't survive, but he redefined victory, not when a flag is planted, but when one man's death forces a nation to rise. When Xerxes retreated, he didn't take Greece's heart with him. They say later, whenever Persian troops marched through Europe, Greek elders would teach their children the first two words, not father or mother, but Leonidas. Because in a single moment, a king had stripped pride from his throne and laid it down in a narrow pass. No harem, no cloak, just shield, spear, and one final nod. Not when a flag is planted, but when one man's death forces a nation to rise. The Persian Empire still stood, but its name was not whispered with reverence. People remembered Thermopylae, remembered Salamis, remembered Plataea, not for strategy, but for the belief that sometimes losing without yielding is its own kind of victory. There are battles remembered in history because of numbers, and there are others, like Thermopylae, remembered for the absurdity of a choice, for an army that dared to stand when everyone said they should retreat, for a king who dared to die, not to gain land, but to preserve how people look at one another. Leonidas didn't seek death. He simply accepted it, not because he had no choice, but because he didn't want another one. Because sometimes choosing right matters more than surviving. Thermopylae wasn't glory. It was a reminder that if one day you're backed into a corner with nothing but bare hands, remember, someone once stood in a narrow pass, facing an entire empire, with a single nod and a heart that refused to kneel. People still speak of those 300, not because they won, but because even in losing, they never became smaller.